Greetings. So, what are we going to read? Well, how about some sugar blues? Just, I don't think we did the first chapter, right? I think we only did. Here, let's look it up. Bum, 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 bum. Oh, shush, 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 shush. All right, let's see. Sugar blues. I think we only did like the middle of the book. Yeah. Yeah, we only did one. Let's see. Dang. I didn't even say what chapter. All right. Let's see. Put this link here. Start at 62. Okay. All right. So how about we start at page 1 today? All right. This is the book that changed my life. Hello, Mr. Masashio. I think your stars are reading pretty good this evening. So I need some extra motivation because I've been craving sugar lately. And this book saved my life because I had chronic allergies, and this book inspired me to give up sugar for 2 weeks, and it got rid of all my allergies. So guess what happened the last 2 weeks? My eyes have been tearing because I've been eating a little bit of sugar. Not that much. But anyways, I feel like it's dark in here. All right. So, Sugar Blues by William Dufty. Here we go. We will start at the very beginning. Oh, it defines sugar. Sugar is refined sucrose, C12H22O11, oxygen 11. Thanks for the thumbs up. Produced by multiple chemical processing of the juice of the sugarcane or beet and removal of all fiber and protein, which amounts to 90% of the natural plant. So natural sugarcane has protein and fiber. Blues, a state of depression or melancholy overlaid with fear. Okay. Fear. Physical discomfort and anxiety. Often expressed lyrically as an autobiographical chronicle of personal disaster. That is quite a poetic definition of blues. Sugar blues is therefore defined as multiple physical and mental miseries caused by human consumption of refined sucrose, commonly called sugar. Contents. Starting with page 11, is it necessary to be personal? Thank you for the thumbs up. All right. Once upon a time, When I was a hopeless square about sucrose, excuse me, I need to sip my orange rind clove cinnamon water. And hopefully not spill it on myself. This is why I need to use straws. Okay, as I was saying. Once upon a time, when I was a hopeless square about sucrose, I triggered an unforgettable encounter between Gloria Swanson and a sugar cube. I had been summoned to a lunchtime press conference in the Fifth Avenue office of a New York attorney. Things were well along when I tiptoed in. Miss Swanson, more alert and thoughtful than anyone in the room, removed her purse from the chair at her side and made room for me. I had never seen her off screen before. I was not expecting to see her there. I was not ready for her at all. Hey, Kit Kat. You want to say hi to everyone? No. A caterer's coolie arrived with the picnic. I have clove in my throat. Hey, baby. You want to say hi to everyone? Pastrami on rye. Why don't you say hi to everyone? Why are you so cute? All right, as I was saying, pastrami on rye, salami on pumpernickel, cardboard jugs of coffee, a tray of monogrammed sugar cubes. My colleagues from several New York daily newspapers kept on wrangling as the rations were scattered around. I unwrapped my sandwich, sprung the lid off of my coffee jug, picked up a sugar cube. I was unpeeling it when I heard her commanding whisper. Oh my gosh, these sugar cubes had wrappers? That's why it had a monogram. That's so fancy, baby. Where are you? What are you doing? What are you doing? That's so fancy. Oh my gosh, wrapped sugar cubes. I didn't get that the first time I read this. Maybe I did. I don't know. Anyway, she whispered, "That stuff is poison." She hissed. I did a good job hissing, didn't I? I won't have it in my house, let alone my body, my sacred temple. I drew back from the precipice and looked at her. Those immense blue eyes widened. Her signature tombstone teeth gleamed in that bite beyond the smile she was carrying. Nation confronting demon. Rum. William Jennings Bryan beholding the cross of gold. Moses with a pork chop on his plate. Like a child caught with one mitt in the cookie jar, I dropped the sugar cube. I noticed the space in front of Miss Swanson was bare of clutter. She wasn't having any of our picnic. She had brought her own, a piece of tree-ripened, unsprayed something. She offered me some. I had never tasted anything better in my life. I told her so. Of course, we had all heard the legends about Swanson's exotic health regimen. Poems have been written about her age-defying presence. Seeing her close up, eyeball to eyeball, it was impossible to doubt that she must be doing something right. I used to get positively livid when I watched people eating poison, she whispered. But I've learned that they can eat ground glass in front of me now, and I don't even twitch. I don't know why I just had an English accent. Go ahead, she said, daring me to mix sugar in my coffee. Eat your white sugar. Kill yourself. See if I care. Again, she flashed the bite beyond the smile. It haunted me for days. Whenever I reached for those sugar tongs, I would draw back and think of her injunction. You never know you're hooked until you decide with your noodle that you're not going to do something anymore. Then you discover your head is not running things. I discovered I had a sugar habit. Hmm, a big one. I wanted to kick it, but I didn't know how. I had had it for years. I must have been hooked very early because my earliest memory of mealtime at home with the family was a kind of purgatory of meat and potatoes, which I suffered through in order to get to heaven, a sweet dessert. Grandma always kept 100-pound bag of good Michigan beet sugar in the pantry of her kitchen with a generous tin scoop on top. When I picked dandelions for her during Prohibition, hmm, she washed them and put them in a huge crock to soak, sprinkled sugar and lemon over them. That sounds good for you, actually. Soaking dandelions? That's so cool. For speedy fermenting. Oh, she made dandelion wine. That's right. And thus produced bootleg wine. Okay. I remember her scattering sugar on the tops of cherry and apple pies, and cookies and fried cakes, and in huge boiling vats of peaches and plums at canning time in the autumn. Sugar went into tomato relish and all kinds of pickles, sweet and sour. When we came home from school, Mrs. Moulton, our neighbor and full time cook, would give us fresh baked bread, spread with butter and heaps of brown sugar on top. Sounds like French toast without the eggs. Hmm. It is possible to remember, but hard to believe, what it was like to live in a small Midwestern town of 50 years ago that was gone forever. The family controlled what children put in their stomachs completely and utterly. We had very little to say about it. Our parents were our protectors. Everyone knew what they would permit and what they would not permit. It was no more possible to sneak a hamburger or a Coca-Cola than it was to rob a bank or miss church on Sunday. The town only had one restaurant. It had once been a saloon. If I walked into a local emporium with a nickel to buy something edible, the owner would have called my father at his office and I would hear about it when he came home. The three grocery stores each had candy counters, and the drugstore on the corner had a soda fountain. Ice cream was something you had on Sunday, and you made it yourself. On state occasions, it might be ordered from the drugstore and delivered on the run by a local track star. Dry ice and freezers were something out of the year 2001. Breakfast, dinner, and supper were eaten at home with Mrs. Moulton as warden, or not at all. There were no there was no way to open the icebox without her watchful presence. Then we became the first family in town to have a Frigidaire. Homemade ice cubes were an invention more wondrous and mysterious than the radio. The cellar began to fall into disuse. Canning began to give way to store-bought things. Soda pop, Coca-Cola, and all the like of soft drinks simply did not exist for us. Canada Dry ginger ale was around, but that was part of Daddy's Prohibition stash. Something for grown-ups to drink, sometimes with their Canadian hooch. It was years later, when I was 8, that a visitor from the outside world introduced the decadent idea of floating ice cream in a glass of the stuff. We might have known about such things earlier had we been permitted to view those corrupting movies, but they were beyond the pale across the other side of the railroad tracks. Cotton candy and other confections sold at fairs and bazaars were as verboten as films. It will make you sick, we were told. That's true. When we noticed other youngsters eating it without going into convulsions, we would call this to our parents' attention, but such pseudo-scientific evidence never cut any ice. My first, I didn't even realize I had this around me. My first sins occurred during our first summer at Crystal Lake. Compared to the town where we lived, Crystal Lake was Babylon or Las Vegas. It had a casino over the water where strangers danced in the dark to a hand that claimed on the side of their bus and the front of the drums to be from Hollywood. Thanks for the hearts. There was a golf course, tennis courts, and speedboats. Indians selling hand-woven baskets to weekend tourists. Girls who smoked cigarettes, boys who went in swimming at night without any tops, and roadside gas pumps with shanties without any tops and roadside gas pumps. Oh, with shanties where bottles of Technicolored sugar water were always on ice. Orange, cherry, strawberry, lemon, and something called Green River. Ooh, Green River soda. What could that have been? Maybe minty? I never lost any sleep over those familiar flavors. The deep purple grapes started me on the road to perdition. By the way, this is William Dufty talking, the author. I had never tasted anything like it at home. The grape pop trip got to be something I couldn't control. I think grape artificial flavor tastes like muscadines more than normal grapes. Don't you all think so? I began to feel a secret kinship with the town drunk. It's true, sugar's a drug, man. I remember the first time I rifled my mother's purse while she was napping. I only took a nickel. Oh my gosh, stealing money to get his sugar fix. 1 nickel at a time. If she didn't have a nickel in change, I didn't dare take a dime. Ooh, he rhymed. 2 bottles might amount to an overdose for all I knew. My gums might turn a telltale purple, or my teeth might start to dissolve. Somehow, I knew how much temptation I could handle. I was careful not to blow this whole thing. We spent our summers at Crystal Lake until I was 12 or 13. By the time I was making $75 a week, those days as a prodigal jazz pianist on the radio. Oh wait, I was making $75 a week in the wintertime season, an undreamed of fortune in those days as a prodigal jazz pianist on the radio. But I couldn't write out a check at a roadside stand. When my summer grape pop habit got out of control, I had to lie, cheat, and steel to support it. Hmm. The day my voice began to change was the beginning of the end of my radio career. If my voice didn't sound childlike anymore, oh, he was a child star. There was nothing remarkable about the way I played piano. Puberty brought other terrors. My face, neck, and back exploded with unsightly pimples. At first, I thought it was leprosy, and I made a few novenas. Novenas? What's a novena? Anyway, I had never noticed anything like this on older boys before. Perhaps I could overlook their flaws, but not my own. I was ashamed to wear the topless swimming trunks that were coming into fashion. The family nurse suggested Noxema. The family laundress was thrilled, and that didn't work. Hey, Kevin. Thanks for the ad info. I know now I was suffering for my sins. If anybody had the perception to point it out to me at the time, they might have saved me years of agony. But who knew about my secret sugar habit? Who ought to have guessed? Where was the family doctor? Well, our town had one, but he wasn't Dr. Marcus Welby. He lived across the street from us. And one of the terrors the whole town lived with was the thought of possible emergency when no one was on hand except Dr. Hudson. For Dr. Hudson was a dope fiend. Those words were spoken of others, never of him. The people of the town merely said, "Poor Mrs. Hudson." The good doctor sometimes walked about town like a zombie. He had a detached bungalow office behind the house. After dark, the kids used to sneak up to his window and peep in to see him lying on his black leather chair with the stirrups completely out of it. When there was an accident in town, volunteer firemen would break down the door of the doctor's office, douse him with water, and stand over him while he put a tourniquet on a farmer's arm that had been caught in a thresher. Then they would rush the victim to the nearest town. If you could afford it, as we could, you summoned the doctor from the next town by telephone. So, none of us ever saw a doctor until we were good and sick. The appalling significance of things that never happened. I was sent to the dentist twice a year when that came into fashion. The dentist related cavities to overdose of sweets. But I never heard a doctor open his mouth about it. The old timers, like Grandma, spoke about eating excesses. It will make you sick. That meant ill to your stomach, in danger of vomiting and such. How could I relate my skin problems to my secret vices? I began noticing that lots of boys my age had similar skin disorders, but not all. Then I heard rumors out behind the barn that my affliction could be caused by excessive masturbation. Hey, masturbation was on page 61 too. I had a friend whose brother was in a Catholic seminary in Chicago studying to be a priest. He was the big authority on canon law and sex. He spread the word that in the Archdiocese of Chicago, masturbating was only a venial sin. If you did it in Michigan, it was mortal. In Illinois, you could have a one-man show at night, wash your pants under the pump in the morning, and trot off to communion. Okay, I took to drowning my sorrows in malted milks, which I discovered in high school. We had moved to a large city by then, and I had to travel several miles downtown to a central high school. I was allowed 10 cents a day for streetcar fare, a nickel each way. Lunch out of a box? I refused to carry anything as unchic as homemade sandwiches and fruit. The 1929 crash was behind me. Things were tough all over. A cut rate drugstore downtown was pushing a special king size chocolate malted, all you can possibly drink for a dime. I'm glad your IQs are increasing. Mine is too. For 2 years, I walked every morning and night in all kinds of weather, just so I could blow that dime and guzzle 5 malteds every week. My skin problems went from bad to worse. I remember being mortified when I had to take a shower at the school gym. Then I heard rumors that acne could be caused by sexual repression. Free souls, I was told, didn't have that kind of problem. I was more than willing to take the plunge, more out of hope of relief from pimples than pent up passion. Y'all, that's like a tongue twister. Say that 10 times. More out of hope of relief from pimples than pent up passion. Wow. This kid had sex to get rid of his pimples. Not, anyway, not the other pimple. Okay. Getting a girl into trouble, contracting VD, these were terrors I would gladly embrace if I could walk shamelessly into juvenile court with that skin you love to touch. Dang, William. In our high school set, nobody smoked. Cigarettes were far too expensive at 10 cents a pack and were considered vaguely unmasculine. Many boys lived with a vision of the Ford Roadster they would inherit at graduation if they abstained from tobacco. Oh, really? That's a nice little offer from the parentals, huh? Meanwhile, we smoked untaxed homegrown things like dried corn silk, dead grapevines, even something the Mexicans called marijuana. All of them made me sick. I could get a better high off a banana split. We never dreamed that Mexican stuff would be merchandised a few decades later like bootleg beer. In the 20s, I had been so rich, I never carried a cent on me. In the 30s, mooching my way through college, holding a job or two on the side, I was so poor, I put every cent on my back where it would show. I remember starving with great elegance, going without lunch in a chalk-stripped British flannel suit with a stiff Duke of Kent collar and contrasting shirt. College was a complete and utter drag, a boring kind of mandatory sentence you had been told you had to serve. I took to collegiate journalism as a kind of lark. There I discovered that the cigarette companies virtually subsidized the university paper with their advertising. Some of the best looking girls on campus worked for the tobacco companies as cigarette pushers. giving away free cigarettes and offering free instruction to inhaling the way Constance Bennett and Betty Davis did in the films. I smoked the free ones, but I never developed a habit of buying them. I would always reach for a sweet in preference to a Lucky Strike. One of the boring things we were required to suffer through was a course called physical education. One was required to swim or trot or play volleyball or lift weights for a certain number of hours each week. They watched you do it, your card was punched, and that was that. Once a year, you had a quick, cursory physical exam. If you asked the young doctor a question about something that was bothering you, he was careful not to tread on the terrain of the local medical society. See your family doctor about that, he would say. His job was to spot latent hernias and athlete's foot. Boop, 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 boop. Where am I? Oh, yeah. On summer vacation, I hitchhiked thousands of miles and lived on Pepsi Cola in those large, economy sized nickel bottles. It was not until I visited the South for the first time that a girl turned me onto something called dope. They served it at soda fountains with lots of crushed ice, vanilla flavoring, syrup, and soda. Up north, it was called Coca-Cola. Down there, common usage preserved overtones of its native origins as a headache remedy. After suffering through 2 years of college, I finally dropped out. It took daring in those days to dream of facing life without a degree. But I could sniff another war in the offing. I felt my real choice was going to be between Leavenworth Penitentiary and Flanders Fields. In the summer of 1965, I met a wise man from the East, a Japanese philosopher who had just returned from several weeks in Saigon. If you really expected to conquer the North Vietnamese, he told me, you must drop Army PXs on them, sugar, candy, and Coca-Cola. That will destroy them faster than bombs. Hey, Mar, what's up? I knew what he was talking about. When I was drafted in 1942, something like that happened to me. Army food was decreed from on high somewhere. We were, as every mother was assured, the best fed troops in all human history. But Army chow set my teeth on edge from the very start. I wanted no part of it. So morning, noon, and night, I haunted the post exchange. It was a 2-year orgy of malted milks, sugared coffee, pastry, candy, chocolate, and Coca-Cola. After many months of that, I developed a fancy case of bleeding hemorrhoids, which scared me to death. I always associated this gruesome malady with advanced age, and here I was in my 20s. Nothing mattered too much anyway. I was headed for Flanders Fields, where all was lost. My first real adult experience with the American medical establishment was with its caricature, U.S. Army medicine. In due course, my body was shipped overseas, bound for Britain. I trotted around the top deck of the blacked out SS Mauritania with a carbine on my shoulder and a heavy army greatcoat soaked with Atlantic spray. 2 hours on, 2 off. By the time we docked at Liverpool, I had a lovely case of walking pneumonia. The media looked at my thermometer and sent me packing back to KP duty. This went on for 6 days. Finally, on the 7th day, the thermometer hit the lucky number. Bells rang, faces softened into sympathy. They rushed me onto a stretcher, and the ambulance carried me to the nearest British hospital. Intensive care, an oxygen tent, and huge doses of the wonder drug of the time. Can you guess what it is? Sulfonilla. No, sulfonilamide. It was then so new a drug that blood samples were taken every hour on the hour to make sure they weren't killing me. I lapsed into a lovely coma and stayed there for days. Wonderful, sweet-smelling nurses changed the bed regularly, poked me for blood, bathed me lovingly all over. Charming, upper-class British ladies comforted me with lilacs. The chaplain lurked in the outer hall. It began to look as though I'd never make it to Flanders Fields. It didn't seem worth the effort. D-Day was just around the corner. Then I awoke one morning, sweating, conscious. I saw some calf's foot jelly on my table, and I sensed an erection. The army had outwitted me. I'd been foiled, doomed to survive for a while longer at the convenience of the government. The heck was that about? When I toddled down the hall the first time to be weighed, the nurses gasped when they saw the scale. Army regulations said you could not be discharged from the hospital until you weighed as much as when you came in. If you stayed in the hospital more than 28 days, you returned not to your outfit, but to a reppy-deppy, a replacement depot where bodies were warehoused, waiting for orders in your size, weight, and classifications. My outfit was hardly Shangri-La, but the reppy-deppy, repple-depple, I meant, was a fate worse than death. Could I put on 12 pounds in 6 days? Each day, British newsboys came through the hospital, peddling bad news. I bought 3 papers every day, always paying with a pound note. The heavy coins I received in change were fastened to my midriff and groin with hospital tape. Fastened. It's hard to read these small print. All right, anyway. Every day when they weighed me in, I had gained a couple of pounds by magic. On D-Day, I climbed the scale triumphantly. My weight was back to the level it had been when I entered the hospital. Within hours, I was with my outfit, headed for Flanders Fields. My buddies nursed me and protected me and brought me back to life by carting me goodies from the PX. I was too weak to get there myself. Eventually, I was packed off by train to Glasgow, by ship to Algiers, then by truck to Oran in the Mediterranean. 3 weeks in the desert, and I was as good as new. There was no PX for miles. My only diversions were the ocean and Algerian beer. And after the landings in southern France, I was packed off to join the First French Army. Arabs, Senegalese, Gums, Sikhs, Vietnamese, with French officers, and non-coms. We lived off the land, no fancy rations and luxuries. Some brought along pots and pans, ducks and geese, sheep and goats, wives and mistresses. For months I went unpaid. I had to forage for clothes and shoes, and I never saw the inside of a PX again. Most of the natives we ate with hadn't tasted sugar in years. It was all on the black market. We lived on horse meat, rabbit, squirrel, dark French peasant bread, and whatever else could be scrounged. Winter in the Vasquez Mountains was brutal and endless, yet I never had a cold or a sniffle. I was never sick for a day in the 18 months I spent in France and Germany with them. Was I bright enough to understand this controlled experiment in nutrition I'd been unwittingly involved in? I might have saved myself years of waste, but I was a total idiot without half a brain or instinct for survival, possessed by the lice in my helmet. On my return to the States, I went on a glorious bander, pie a la mode, cake with whipped cream, malted milks by the dozen, chocolate and Pepsi, sugar, sugar, sugar. Within weeks, I was flat on my back with one strange malady after another. My hemorrhoids blossomed. Every day my fever rose and fell. Batteries of tests produced names of disease: infectious mononucleosis, atypical malaria, hepatitis, shingles, exotic skin conditions, ear infections, eye diseases. When I ran out of money, I discovered the wonders of socialized medicine at the Veterans Administration. I became a charter member of the Blue Cross and Blue Shield. I enrolled in one of the first prepaid group medical plans. For over 15 years, I subjected myself to an endless whirligig of doctors, hospitals, diagnoses, treatment, tests, drugs, more drugs. During all that rigmarole, I cannot recall a single doctor out of the dozens who treated me who ever displayed the slightest curiosity about what I ate and drank. Speaking of drinking, great winter drink here: orange peels, cloves, cinnamon. Doused with hot water, soaking for 24 hours. Yeah. That'll help your blood sugar. Inevitably, the day arrived when the drugs were no longer effective. Migraine headaches would not go away. For 10 days, I couldn't work, sleep, eat, or move. I checked into the VA hospital in Manhattan as an emergency case. I simply could not endure the pain any longer. They gave me the words. They gave me the works. Batteries of tests and a physical as complete as I'd ever had. After all the machines had spoken, the young doctor translated it all for me. No cancer, no brain tumor, no this, no that. In fact, he smiled happily. I was a perfect specimen, normal in every respect for my age. Incredulous, I stammered. But what do I do about the headaches? If they don't go away in a week or two, he suggested, come back anytime. Okay. A week or two? I was ready for the worst, and this was it. I couldn't endure another hour. I telephoned a friend whose father had been a famous physician. He had connections with a fancy society physician on Park Avenue. They took out a huge forbidding syringe and sprayed something very cool up into my nostrils. After a nap, I had my first relief in days. I knew enough about drugs to know it had been cocaine. Well, I thought this is how junkies begin. Then my friend put me on a diet. This seemed bizarre, but I decided to humor him. I didn't know anywhere else to get cocaine. He took me off cigarettes and coffee, suggested oatmeal in the morning, rice for lunch, and more rice and chicken for dinner. His diagnoses? Postural hypotension, slowing down of circulation. He also prescribed hot baths morning and night and calisthenics at midday. I tried giving up coffee and cigarettes, but it made it almost impossible for me to work. My day began with coffee, huge jugs of it with sugar and cream. I might have 4 or 5 before noon. After that, destroyed my appetite. After that destroyed my appetite for lunch, I would taper off on Pepsi Cola. By dinner time, I was in such a sugar stupor, it took Chinese duck or lobster a diablo to rouse my appetite. I tried his, so that's good to note. Sugar stupors take your appetite away. I tried his diet and got temporary relief. Then I would binge until the headache returned. And then I would try again. I was learning, but I didn't realize it at the same time. At the time. Thanks for the love. One night, in one sitting, I read a little book that said very simply that if you're sick, it's your own damn fault. Pain is the final warning. You know better than anyone else how you've been abusing your body, so stop it. Sugar is poison, it said. More lethal than opium and more dangerous than atomic fallout. Whoa! That's the quote, y'all. I'm going to write it down in all caps. Sugar is poison. It said. More lethal. I wonder who wrote that book. Than opium. And more dangerous than atomic fallout. I mean, what a statement is that? Wow. Whew. So, at that moment, the shades of Gloria Swanson and the sugar cubes were affecting him. He was remembering that. Hadn't she told me everyone has to find out for themselves the hard way? I had nothing to lose but my pain. I began next morning with firm resolve. I threw all the sugar out of my kitchen. Then I threw out everything that had sugar in it, cereals and canned fruit, soups, breads. Since I had never really read any labels carefully, I was shocked to find the shelves were soon empty. So was the refrigerator. I began eating nothing but whole grains and vegetables. Yeah, they are worse. Although organic sugars aren't as bad because they have some of the proteins and fiber. But high fructose corn syrup's the worst. But yeah, fresh vegetables and fruits. I'm macking on my blueberries here. I mean, I had a persimmons earlier, sweeter than any candy you could ever get. So good. Fruits just taste so much sweeter. In about 48 hours, I was in total agony. Yeah, detoxing from sugar is no joke. Overcome with nausea, crashing migraine. If pain was a message, this was a long one. Very involved, intense, but in code. It took hours to break the code. I knew enough about junkies to recognize reluctantly my kinship with them. I was kicking cold turkey, the thing they talked about with such terror. After all, heroin is nothing but a chemical. They take the juice of the poppy and they refine it into opium, and then they refine it into morphine, and finally to heroin. Sugar is nothing but a chemical. They take the juice of the cane or the beet and they refine it to molasses, and then they refine it to brown sugar, and finally to strange white crystals. It's no wonder dope pushers dilute pure heroin with milk sugar, lactose, in order to make their glassine packages a treat to the eye. I was kicking all kinds of chemicals cold turkey: sugar, aspirin, cocaine, caffeine, chlorine, fluorine, sodium, monosodium glutamate, and all those other multisyllabic horrors listed in fine print on the tins and boxes I had just thrown into the trash. I had it very rough for about 24 hours, but the morning after was a revelation. I went to sleep with exhaustion, sweating, and tremors. Excuse me. I woke up feeling reborn. Grains and vegetables tasted like a gift from the gods. The next few days brought a succession of wonders. My rear stopped bleeding. So did my gums. My skin began to clear up and had a totally different texture when I washed. I discovered bones in my hands and feet that had been buried under bloat. I bounced out of bed at strange hours in the early morning, raring to go. My head seemed to be working again. I had no problems anymore. My shirts were too big, so were my shoes. One morning, while shaving, I discovered I had a jaw. To make a long, happy story short, I dropped from 205 pounds to a neat 135 in 5 months, and ended up with a new body, a new head, a new life. One day, I burned my Blue Cross card. About the time, I noticed a picture of Gloria Swanson in the New York Times. I sat right down and wrote her a letter. "You were right," I said. "Wow, were you ever right? I didn't get your message then, but I've got it now." That was in the 1960s. Since then, I have been sugar-free. I haven't been near a doctor, a hospital, a pill, or a shot in all that time. I haven't even touched so much as an aspirin. Today, when I see someone unpeeling a sugar cube, I don't understand these peels on sugar cubes. When I was a kid, I would pop sugar cubes. They didn't have any peels on them. And then I sucked the peel of a lemon. But anyway, that probably saved me. Today, when I see someone unpeeling a sugar cube, I twitch just as I remember Gloria Swanson twitching at that lunchtime press conference. I yearn to collar them into some quiet corner and tell them how easy it is to lose the sugar blues. Lose the sugar blues, y'all. I'm telling you. Consider yourself collared. What have you got to lose? Oh, so now he does have a little song. Sugar blues, everybody's singing the sugar blues. I'm so unhappy, I feel so bad, I could lay me down and die. You can say what you choose, but I'm all confused. I've got the sweet, sweet sugar blues. More sugar. I've got the sweet, sweet sugar blues. Oh, you do, huh? The song Sugar Blues was published in 1923. Oh, that was actually a song. The year the United States rocked with the Teapot Dome scandal, and millions of sugar diabetics began shooting up with a newly discovered miracle drug, insulin. In 1923, it was also the heyday of prohibition. When booze became illegal here, sugar consumption zoomed. The whole country acted like a gathering of arrested alcoholics spending the evening at AA. They couldn't keep their mitts out of the candy jar. Teetotalers were often the biggest sugar fiends, vowing alcohol would never touch their lips while pouring in the sugar, which produces alcohol in tummies instead of bathtubs. It's like the THCA of alcohol, sugar. Like other nemeses in the Black Blues experience, gin, cocaine, morphine, and heroin, sugar happened to be white. The lyric of Sugar Blues shrewdly conveys the antagonistic polarity of human experience with sweet and perilous white stuff. Attraction, repulsion, the gimme, stop me, get away, closer, pull it out, deeper feeling at the root of the blues. Natural body wisdom tells you it's no good, and yet you want it bad. Oh, yeah, the Great Depression from the Sugar Blues, right. Sugar Blues began as a song celebrating a completely personal human condition. It deserves, 50 years later, to become the universal name for an addictive planetary plague. Poets, especially the ones who write the nation's songs, are often years ahead of physicians and politicians at coming up with the proper name for global malaise. I haven't managed to discover or reveal in the succeeding pages everything I always wanted to know about sugar and was afraid to find out. However, I've learned enough to conclude that what passes for medical history needs to be bulldozed and overhauled. In the eternal order of the universe, man-refined sugar, like all other things, plays its part. Perhaps the sugar pushers are our predators, leading us into temptation, peddling a kind of sweet, sweet human pesticide, which lures greedy seekers after la dolce vita into self-destruction, weeding the human garden, naturally selecting the fittest for survival, while the rest go down in another biblical flood. Not water this time, but Coke, Pepsi, and Dr. Pepper, purifying the human race for a new age. I want to write this also. Perhaps the sugar pushers, like the creepy ice cream men, are our predators. Wow. Leading us into temptation, etc. I was going to say something about that. Oh, yeah. You know what I think sugar does? I think sugar takes vitamin D out of the body. I think that's why it's called can D. You're canning the D. What do you think? In general, the practicing scientist hardly concerns himself with history, says Dr. Francois Jacob, Nobel Prize winner and author of The Logic of Life, A History of Heredity, The New York Times, April 11th, 1974. I was not happy about the way they tell the history of biology. In each paper, a scientist writes what his predecessors learned, and so forth, and winds up with a linear history from error to truth. It's not like that. It sure ain't. And that's the end of that chapter. The next chapter is the mark of Cain. And we will save that for another day, my dear. Put that in our library. Thank you very much. It was wonderful reading with and to all of you lovely folks out there. You got your collar on. Why not stop the sugar? Tell me what happens. Comment below. 2 weeks. Can you go 2 weeks? It's a party. Eat those apples, those oranges, that broccoli. Just no sugar. No sugar at all. Fruits, okay. But no refined sugar. No white stuff, okay? Coconut sugar, date sugar, go slow. But no white stuff. Dream sweet, y'all.